and distribution of a vaccine or vaccines. So I'd like to thank Yuveng for setting up this briefing, and once again, welcome all the guests. Before I go on to introducing our main speakers this afternoon, just a couple of things. We will have a period for questions and answers at the end, which will be undertaken by my colleague Masidi from the Press Club. So please, while we go along, feel free to post your questions and comments in the chat box. A request also, if you don't mind, please leave your details, just your name and email, so that we have a register of who attended this media briefing. And if there are any questions we don't get to, these, I'm assured, will be dealt with after the briefing. So to address us now, we're very honored to have Professor Helen Rees, the chair of the board of SAHPRA, who will give us some context of the COVID vaccine. Prof. Rees is the executive director of the WITS Reproductive Health and HIV Institute, and also co-director of the WITS Center for Vaccinology, and she chairs the program and policy committee of the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization. Prof. Rees, it's over to you, please. Prof. Rees, are you with us? Yuvin, can you advise me if Prof. Rees is on the call?
I did see her. I
thought I did.
Also saw her.
No, hello everybody. I was making hand signals. I was muted centrally.
Oh, sorry.
This time it wasn't my fault. So,
okay, please take it over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much. And I think it's really important that we have more events like this with the media, because one of the things that we want to do, first of all, around the public health importance of vaccines, is to create confidence in processes, and eventually, once we get vaccines, to create community demand. The confidence in the processes very strongly relates to people understanding what the role of a regulatory authority is. What does it mean to have the equivalent of an emergency use permission? What does it mean to have licensure? How do we know if it's safe? How are we going to monitor these in the longer term? How quick are we going to be? Because we know that the regulator doesn't necessarily have a reputation that's for speed, but we are trying to address that. And particularly now for COVID, everything has been done at top speed. So just to sort of start to where we are, as you all know, there are now over 200 vaccines in development, the majority of which are still in preclinical development. We have 11 vaccines that are in phase 3 trials, 5 of which we are starting to get efficacy data. And we're seeing not only press statements about efficacy, but there are now publications, for example, on the Pfizer and the AstraZeneca. And these are peer-reviewed publications in very reputable journals. And one of the things about that versus a press statement is that it gives us confidence that professional colleagues have looked at the data and have approved the publication of that data, i.e. approving the contents, as opposed to a company that's just saying, I think I've got a good vaccine. So that's important as well. But so far, SAHPRA hasn't had any applications for licensure or emergency use. What we have had applications, and Tumi will tell you about that, is obviously for permission for clinical trials. There are, as you know, lots of different technologies. Some are very new technologies. Some are well-established technologies. Some technologies, such as Pfizer, require the ultra-cold chain of -70. Other technologies will require 2 doses, whereas we're hoping something like the J&J, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, will possibly require 1, as is possible for the Merck vaccine that's in progress. Some will be more suited for older people, and some will have less impact or immunogenicity on older people and possibly less effective. Some might work for HIV positive individuals, some might have less of an impact, and so on. So many different considerations. What we do know to begin with, however, is that we're not going to have the luxury, in fact, anywhere in the world, but particularly in the low middle income countries, of having a whole slew of vaccines to choose from. We're going to get vaccines coming through to us in small quantities to begin with, and we'll have perhaps one vaccine to begin with, then 2, then 3. We are going to see a lot more results from clinical trials coming out in the next 2 to 3 months. So we will have a larger number, we hope, of successful vaccines. But we are going to have limited quantities. So we're not talking about suddenly scaling up to 60% of our population overnight. We're going to have to then think about who does this vaccine work for, and how is it going to be, to whom is it going to be targeted? And there are other groupings that are looking at that. There's a MAC on vaccines, and the Department of Health is also looking at that aspect. For the regulatory point of view, what we will be looking at is the detailed data on each vaccine to look at safety and efficacy and the quality of the product, first off. And we'll also be working very closely with other regulators and the World Health Organization to speed up that process. I'll stop there and hand back to Tumi, but I'm obviously available for questions as we get into discussion. Thank you.
Well, thanks. Thank you very much. Tumi, let me just tell you a little bit about Tumi before we turn to her. So Tumi is Dr. Boitumelo Semete, the CEO of SAHPRA, and she's going to speak a bit more, as Helen mentioned, about the process. She holds a PhD in biochemistry from Northwest and an MSc in management finance from the Wits Business School. She also undertook postdoctoral work in the UK and Switzerland with a focus on TB drug delivery systems, and has extensive experience in health technology innovation. And I mentioned to her before the press briefing started, she joined SAHPRA in January. I don't know if she had any idea what kind of a year this was going to be for her in this role, but we look forward to hearing your comments. Thanks to me.
Thank you very much. And again, we are excited to be having this platform together with the Press Club, really just to engage the public on this matter of vaccines. And we thought as a regulator that it's important that we provide this platform of engagement. And it's for 2 reasons, really. The first is to give the public confidence that us as a regulator will ensure that whatever product that eventually is available in the country would be a product that complies to the principles of safety, quality, and efficacy. But also it's important that we give the public confidence in the processes that we would follow. You may have seen recently, the MHRA has given emergency use authorization for the Pfizer product. And as at Thursday or Friday, the FDA did similarly. And again, the way that they did it was through a public forum. And it's important that all of us as regulators really give our citizens the comfort and the confidence that whatever product that would enter the market would be a quality product. As already indicated, we're sitting with just around 200 vaccines that are currently in development. About 58 of those are at different stages of clinical trial. Then we've got about 11 or so that are in different phases, particularly more in phase 2 and 3 trials. We are quite excited as a country, and we're quite excited also being a regulator, that we enabled the country to participate in the clinical trials, which means that then the data from clinical trials conducted in South Africa would then be considered by these applicants as they look at safety, quality, and efficacy of their trials. So the ones that have made significant progress to date is the Pfizer-BioNTech product. You've heard about the Moderna product, the University of Oxford in collaboration with AstraZeneca, and they've announced their interim results. We're doing expedite the processes is that we're applying different mechanisms. And these are mechanisms that we've deliberated on quite extensively as an international community of regulators, very much being led and guided by the WHO. And so there's 3 mechanisms in essence that we would be applying to ensure that as regulators, we are enablers of access, But also for us as a South African regulator, we want to ensure that, quality products reach the South African market, and that when these are then ready for market access, we've done and applied our regulatory rigor in the assessment thereof. So the processes that I'll speak to now are what we've agreed to at a global level. And again, this is to ensure that we enable. So to expedite the process of registration of vaccines, we're not going to cut any corners. But what we will do is the following. We will be applying what we call our rolling review submissions. That means that as the applicant has sufficient data to provide to us, they will then avail that information, and we would be reviewing that data so that we don't sit in a position where we've got large pieces of data and it then takes time. So it's a rolling review, which is a similar process that other regulators have applied. We will also be applying a reliance regulatory framework, again aligning with with other international regulators together with the WHO pre-qualified process. We've also agreed on a collaborative approach with the World Health Organization, and we're quite excited that some of our experts, both within SAHPRA and our external experts at the universities in the country, are part of this global collaborative review process. So South Africa is really playing quite an important part in being part of the assessment and the review of these vaccines that are developed. So as we review this data, and we will look at the scientific data in a lot of detail, looking for its efficacy, safety, and quality aspects. And as the applicants generate more data under this rolling review submission, they will then provide that. I must stress that every application will be reviewed on the basis of its scientific merit. So we will look at this as a case-by-case approach. As of today, we received one application. This was received on Thursday evening from J&J, and we've started the review process. But also what we've done to ensure that we enable is that we've engaged with pharmaceutical companies that are looking to register their product in the country. We've had pre-submission discussions with them where we've advised them in terms of what is the data that we would require as a regulator. So we really hope that this process that we've outlined and we've also published on our website gives the industry sufficient information in terms of what is expected. But another very important stakeholder for us is the public. Many of you may have consumed various sources of information through various media platforms. But for us as the regulators, I've indicated earlier, it's important that we give you as the public confidence that whatever product that would be made available in the country would have gone through a very stringent regulatory process through SAHPRA. And so, like any medication, you do expect that these health products, vaccines in this case, would have some side effects. And as we are looking into that, and we're working very closely with the applicants, our mandate requires that we monitor such adverse effects and ensure that these are properly recorded, and that we encourage the public to ensure that wherever they would be accessing this vaccine, whichever health professional they will be working with, if they do experience any adverse side effects, they immediately report that to their healthcare professional. But also we would like to urge the public that they communicate these adverse side effects through SAHPRA. We have within SAHPRA what we call the Pharmacovigilance Unit, and they're responsible for monitoring, detection, assessment, and understanding any adverse side effects that is generated from medicines as well as vaccines in this context. Because our intent is to ensure that any product that is utilized is a safe product. And so we would like to encourage the public to report. We do have a page on our website. It's called Adverse Drug Reactions and Product Quality Reporting. On that page, you can report any adverse side effects that you experience. But also there's a form that we have on our website that you can complete to report these. But we would really like to encourage the public to work through the healthcare professionals so that these adverse effects are adequately reported. Now, you're probably asking what then happens when we detect any vaccine-related adverse side effects. So this is where the quality of the information that we receive becomes important, because for us as a regulator, there are different options. We would be engaging with the applicant to share that these are the side effects that we're noting, and that would mean either we amend the product information or the patient information leaflet. If these are side effects, again, we've got a global community, international community of the Drug Safety Monitoring Board, wherein these adverse effects can be shared and a decision is made whether to continue to have that product or not to continue. So it's important that the public does work with us here and provides us with the information. Lastly, I just want to comment on, there's been a lot of sentiment and we've received a number of questions around how is it that this development of vaccines has taken such a short period of time? Are we as regulators, relaxing their requirements, etc.? And I would like to clearly state that we're not relaxing requirements here. The safety, quality, and efficacy of these products is of utmost importance to us. But there's been a number of publications that we've also been looking at. And in essence, if I can just touch on these, one of the key drivers of this accelerated development could be access to funding. Typically in R&D and in development, it takes some time to raise funding, and sometimes it could be a limiting factor. We've seen that a lot of resources have gone into development of these, but also a number of the technologies that are utilized aren't completely new. These are platform technologies that have been utilized for other vaccines or have been in development for a while. So as regulators, as the scientific community, we're quite familiar with the platform technologies, and therefore, as we assess, there's a lot of information that we're able to do that. Again, the pace of R&D in understanding the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine has been quite important. In January, we already had a sequence of this virus, which typically takes some time. But again, because of the technological advances, we saw that we had the sequence available much earlier in the pandemic, which meant that for vaccine developers, they had this accessible to them and they could then utilize that. Again, regulators, as I've indicated, we've put in place mechanisms such as this rolling reviews, such as this global collaboration on reviews, and that has indeed accelerated, and it's brought the best minds in the world really to come and evaluate these vaccines. And as I've said, we're quite excited that South Africa is part of this collaborative review programs. So just to end off, I just want to stress this point, particularly to the public, that whatever products that would be made available in the country, we will, as a regulator, ensure that it's a product that complies with the principles of safety, quality, and efficacy. Thank you. I'll pause here for now.
Well, thank you very much. I think that reassurance is very important, especially considering, the time frames that we're looking at. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague from the Press Club, Masidi, and she will be dealing with the question and answer. And we'll start with Wendell's question, Wendell from Reuters. And then if other people have questions, please feel free to use the chat box and put your questions forward. Thanks very much.
Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you to Professor Rees and Dr. Simiti for their address. The first question that we have, I'm actually going to touch on the 3 points that Wendell from Reuters has raised. The first question being that are there any details on how the regulator will deal with issues like HIV that are particularly significant in South Africa? That would be great. Pfizer's shot here in the UK is not recommended for anyone with a suppressed immune system, HIV, for instance. Have you discussed this issue yet? And then the second part of the question is, in the regulator's mind, what is likely to be the first vaccine approval given and when? Also, is it fair to say that at this moment in time that the J&J and AstraZeneca candidates are best suited to South Africa? And what does this mean for further vaccine being brought onto, sorry, I'm just scrolling through the question here, being brought onto the market or potentially being excluded. The third part of his question is that what is conditional registration? Can I say temporary emergency registration? And what sort of parameters does it impose on vaccine producers with a Section 21 application? Will a Section 21 application be applicable? I'm going to hand over to Dr. Sumete to attempt to respond to the first three questions, while we encouraging our colleagues in the media space to continue to pose their questions on the chat box. And we encourage you to also introduce yourself as well as the media house that you are representing. Dr. Sumete, over to you.
No, thank you very much. And I've got a few of our colleagues that have joined me to tackle some of the questions, specifically our Chief Regulatory Officer, Ms. Portia Nkambule, who I will ask to talk to the issues of HIV and a suppressed immune system. We also have Ms. Silverani Pareachi, who's our Senior Manager for Pharmaceutical Evaluation. I'll ask her to talk to the issue of the conditional registration. And we also have Mr. Dosang Sehloho, who is the Senior Manager for Clinical Evaluation. Some of these questions, but I'll talk to the one around which to approve first. And this is a difficult one because it will really depend on the quality of the data that's being made available to us. So it's not something that we can say right from the beginning that this is the one we will approve first. It really depends on the quality. In terms of what it means if you have a certain one approved before the others, the key thing with this disease is that a lot is still unknown. And hence, as a global community, we're all very open to having different types of vaccines because, again, there's still a lot of post-market surveillance that needs to be done to determine which one would continue to be effective even into the long run. So the community and even us as regulators, we're not saying if one vaccine is approved, then we cannot approve another. No. So any vaccine application that is made to SAHPRA that meets the registration requirements, we will then provide authorization. I'll ask Portia to talk to the matter of the immune suppression and HIV. Over to you, Portia.
Okay. Thank you very much, CEO, and good afternoon to all the participants on the call. Yes, this is a very important question here. As we have heard that the UK is not recommending anyone with suppressed immune system to take the vaccine shot. The CEO in her opening remarks, as well as the chairperson, did indicate that SAHPRA, have other regulatory authorities that we align ourselves with when it comes to reviews and registration of products. And in this particular case, what we will do is that we will look into the data that has been submitted. That will be the same, if it's the same data that's submitted to UK and also submitted to SAHPRA, and make a decision on that. It is well known that we have the high burden of disease of HIV in the country. So what we will do is that in making our decision, we will take that into consideration. Over.
Thank you, Portia. And Silverani, can you comment on the conditional registration?
So thank you. In terms of the Medicines Act, we have a possibility of providing for registration of a product, which is Section 15. And in addition to that, we have the possibility of imposing conditions of registration. So for instance, if we have an application for a vaccine to be registered, there would be an assessment in terms of its quality, safety, and efficacy. However, in the process of the assessment, we may find that it's necessary to issue certain terms and conditions which the sponsor has to provide. For instance, if one has to look at longer-term clinical follow-up or post-marketing safety data, these are some of the conditions that we would impose, and this is then called a conditional registration. In terms of classifying it as Section 21, it's completely different. Section 21 talks about an unregistered medicine, whereas in the case of a conditional registration, the review process has taken its course, and where necessary, based on the assessment done, the regulator may then request for certain conditions to be met. The sponsor would be advised in terms of when the information should be submitted. So hence we have a referral to an authorization or a registration, which is conditional in that respect. Thank you. Over.
I'd also like for Prof. Rees, she's one of our experts in the area of vaccines and HIV. Maybe if she can also comment.
Yes, it's a very important question. Probably some of you are familiar with the earlier data that came out from Cape Town, from the Western Cape, which looked opportunistically at people attending clinics for ARVs who are HIV positive, and we also looked at the risk for those who are admitted. So there is an increased risk of morbidity, mortality amongst HIV-infected people. It's over twofold, about 2.4-fold, and obviously that data is still being generated. So this is a risk group. Now, so far, some of the vaccines are starting to look at this. The Chadox vaccine, the AstraZeneca vaccine, recruited 50 HIV-positive people to look at safety and immunogenicity. Clearly, you can't look at efficacy because the numbers are very small, but you can look at the immune responses, and that looked promising. But so as we go on, we would want to see some of that data, particularly for HIV-positive populations.
Over to you, Masidi. We've answered the questions you posed.
Thank you, Dr. Semeti. I'm going to touch on the last question that was also raised by Wendell. So his last question is SAHPRA preparing to restrict people with severe food, drug, and vaccine allergies? The food angle is probably the newest, and how many people in your country this would affect? And perhaps a follow-up on that, Dr. Smith, would be that this is something that came through one of our WhatsApp line. You've touched on 11 different vaccines, and somebody prior to that had actually said that given that we have public and private healthcare in South Africa, what would be the determination in terms of which vaccine a patient would have to go through based on whether they are receiving private or public health care?
No, thank you. And I don't know if maybe Prof. Rees, you want to comment first, particularly on the rollout of the vaccines.
Yes. So I think the question is, are there sort of pre-existing conditions that would sort of prohibit? In the vaccine trials, you've probably seen in the phase 3 trials, we're enrolling 30,000, 40,000 people. And if you add those together with phase 2 and phase 1, tens of thousands of people for any one of these vaccines have been exposed. And one of the things that is looked at in the course of these trials, in the phase 1, in the phase 2, and again in the phase 3, is safety. So you are looking for any serious adverse events that might be systemic, like allergy. But very often the common adverse events are things that probably everyone on this call has experienced with the vaccine, is that you'll get a sore arm. Sometimes you can get a bit of a fever or muscle ache and so on. It'll depend on the vaccine, but safety is absolutely paramount. But we also do look then at different populations and how different populations respond to these vaccines. One of the things we're aware of, for example, is that older people's immune system is, once you get over 60, in fact, it goes downhill, I'm afraid to say, from about the age of 50. But certainly once you get over 65, the immune system doesn't respond as well to some vaccines. It's been very encouraging to see, however, that in many of the vaccines, well, the few vaccines we have data on, they all seem to have a good response. They seem to generate a good immune response in older populations, which is encouraging. But again, you would look very closely to see whether there's anything idiosyncratic about particular groups that receive a vaccine. And so in many of the trials, we're seeing that people with these comorbidities, people of all ages, are now being enrolled to get that kind of data.
No, thank you. And again, on the issue of the, severe food allergies, etc., this is something that would continuously be monitored in the trials, particularly, phase 1 trials that are looking at the safety of these vaccines. In the design, they ensure that they, include quite a range of matters that need to be considered when the trial is conducted, such as any, predisposing conditions or any previous allergies, etc. Thank you.
The second one to me was the regulator's response to the public and the private sector. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes, sure, thank you. So for us as a regulator, we assess the product itself. And so we wouldn't be in a position to guide and say it should be utilized in the private sector or the public sector. We really look at the principles of safety, efficacy, and quality. Once the product is made available, there's then other stakeholders then that get involved in terms of how it's rolled out, access, issues of pricing, etc. Our role is quite narrow in that we just ensure that the product goes through the regulatory process and that it does meet all the requirements. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Samete. I do have a question here from Laura Lopez. She didn't indicate where she's from, but her question says, J&J has applied for rolling review. Have any of makers of the COVID-19 vaccines being trialed by Vets RHI, Vida, applied to do the same? And then a follow-on question, Dr. Samete, without necessarily being controversial, for an ordinary South African who has had contradicting views on the vaccine, why should I be open to the whole idea of receiving vaccine? And what are the key messages that you would like an ordinary South African to understand the basics on the vaccine and where the process is?
Thank you very much. So let me start with the question of from Laura around have any of the other makers of other vaccines trialed locally applied? So, as indicated, we've engaged in what we call pre-submission discussions with a number of companies. Pfizer, we have done so, and they're busy with the clinical trial, and a few others that are currently conducting clinical trials in the country. So we've had discussions with them, and there's an intent to submit. Obviously, they need to ensure that they've got the data, and also packaged in a manner that makes it, that enables us to review that data. So we do expect that we'll start to see a few more submission. And I would expect that, if these companies are conducting clinical trials in the country, there is an intention to make the product available in South Africa. And in terms of why, a question that would be posed by just an ordinary South African around why they should take vaccines. And again, I'll ask Prof. Reeves to come in and assist here. But if you've looked at the impact that vaccines have had in eradicating major diseases like polio, etc., you really do understand the importance of having vaccines. And in this case, we are now aware that we're going through the second wave. There's also talk of other countries in the north possibly going to experience a third wave. So this is not a disease that will go away just by treating it. It's clear that we need a multi-pronged approach. And while there's mechanisms and research and clinical trials going on for the treatment of the disease, we do also have to, as a scientific community, look at vaccines. A number of you may be aware of other coronaviruses that we've had, and the understanding that we may be sitting even with other coronavirus pandemics in future. So the issue of vaccines becomes very important to say, how do we, in the short prevent the spread thereof, but also in future to eradicate that. So the role that vaccines have played in many other diseases, even with Ebola, for example. So there's a very strong rationale from just looking in the past, the impact that vaccines have had in the health sector. I don't know if Prof. Rees would like to comment.
Thank you. No, I'm very pleased. This is probably, for this discussion, one of the most important things for us to discuss, because we really do need the support of the media. Sometimes when I think back to the days of AIDS denialism that some of you also worked through, unfortunately, the views of one person can be put up as equal to the views of 99.9% of the scientific community. And I was in many debates then where I was fighting to say we have to recognize HIV, but was often in a forum when I was put one-to-one against someone else as if these are equal opinions. For vaccines, the scientific world, the public health world, with tiny exceptions, endorses the importance of vaccines. They're probably, together with clean water, the most important public health intervention that we have. The second thing is that you probably all also heard about herd immunity. And we're speculating, you'll see the numbers change all the time, but we're speculating whether we have to get a level of immunity in our populations up to a particular level, and it's speculated at between 60 and 70% at the moment, but that might change, in order to stop transmission of this virus. Now, I think you're all seeing the second wave numbers go up and up and up. If we do not have a vaccine, frankly, that is going to go on and on and on. And in 2023, we could be sitting here having the same discussion. And just think where our economic lives and the quality of everyone's lives will be without that. That if we want to get protection and herd immunity up, we have to actually have a vaccine. We cannot do it wave upon wave. There are 1.2 billion people in the African region. Are we going to wait for 60 to 70% of all Africans to become infected in our own setting? Are we going to wait for 40 million people to become infected so that we can then say, oh, we're out of the woods? Natural immunity will protect. There are some conditions such as human papillomavirus and tetanus where natural immunity wanes very quickly, whereas the vaccine gives much more robust and durable immunity. We don't know that. We absolutely need a vaccine. And if for no other reason, if we look at the numbers of people dying, the first thing about a vaccine is it stops people getting desperately ill and it stops people dying. The second thing is that we will stop transmission of this virus and we will cut this terrible pandemic short.
Thank you, Professor Rees. Dr. Simete, do you want to add on to what she said?
No, thank you.
All right. Perhaps we can use this opportunity to afford yourself, Dr. Simete, as well as Professor Rees, an opportunity to just give us your closing remarks in as far as this briefing is concerned, and any message that you would like to leave the public with as well.
No, thank you. I'll start with the So as you know, the very start that we would want to share with the public is that as a regulator, we will ensure that any vaccine that is made available in the country has gone through very thorough scientific review, that we've satisfied ourselves that it meets the regulatory requirements that we've applied even in many other vaccines that we have available in the country. So we're very familiar with the process of review of vaccines. I think we've got experts in the country that will enable and ensure that, that's required in assessing these vaccines, and that whatever product that's available is a product that we have confidence that it meets the requirements of safety, quality, and efficacy. I'll pause here. Thank you. Helen, over to you.
No, thank you. I mean, the one thing I would say, and I think we would be very happy to have discussions like this, and I think it's really important that as journalists you feel free to ask us and challenge on anything that is of concern, and of course there will be, and there are, is that we really, really need your support in building up vaccine confidence. And later on, when we get access to vaccines, building up vaccine demand. And remember that we are going to, the early vaccines that we get, people with comorbidities, health workers, and this population to need to have very strong messaging out there to explain to people why, first of all, we're going, for example, if we decide to go for healthcare workers first, why are we doing that? We've got a limited amount of vaccine. Why are we doing it? Secondly, to really explain the importance of the regulatory process to get confidence in any vaccine that is either licensed or given a conditional approval. And thirdly, to explain how we're going to go on to monitor the safety and effectiveness of these vaccines. We really need the support of the media to help us to target different groupings to those that we normally target vaccines for, and to build up confidence in the whole vaccine endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you. I've taken back the chair from Mercedes. I just would like to thank the people who did pose questions. I think Jean Robertson has just made a comment here. Thank you for the informative briefing. I think we can all agree that that was very informative, and the message is very clear. I think the message is it's very straightforward, and I hope that we'll be able to engage with you again in the new year, perhaps when the first vaccines do become available. But I'd like to thank everybody who participated in this briefing this afternoon. I found that SAHPRA is very open to questions, so if anybody has a question that they didn't pose now and would like to do so later, I'm very sure that Juven and his colleagues would be willing to help you with any questions that you might. So please, thank you very, very much to Prof. Rees and to Dr. Sameti for your time this afternoon. And also just to thank you for including the press club in your briefing. If I may just use this for a quick ad break. The press club is always willing to do media briefings, to work with partners in media briefings. And a little advert for the press club too, that we have the Newsmaker of the Year nominations closing at the end of this month. So far, we only have one nomination, and that's for COVID-19. But if anybody has any alternatives, feel free to let us know. I can give you the website of SAHPRA. It's www.sahpra.org.za if you have any further questions. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and all strength to those who are involved in the process of getting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.